The views expressed on Town Hall are not necessarily those of KATU or Fisher Broadcasting Incorporated. Imagine the terror, leaving a bad relationship only to be hunted down by your ex.
After all those years, I got a restraining order, and it wasn't helping me at all. It didn't do me any good.
If I lived in the same state with my ex-husband, or he came to this state to live, I would probably go to a plastic surgeon and have a face change, because I don't believe I'm safe.
Does the law give women the protection they need from abusive husbands and boyfriends? Are restraining orders unfair to men living in fear when there's nowhere to hide? Next on Town Hall. And now, your moderator, Jack Faust.
Hi. 2 months ago, to the north of us, Sherry Jones was gunned down by her husband, who then killed himself. In death, Sherry Jones joined countless thousands of American women who have been murdered, brutalized, or terrorized while under the protection of a restraining order, which is a court injunction ordering the husband or domestic partner to leave them alone. And her death sent shivers down the spines of thousands of women who right now in our states of Oregon and Washington are under the protection of those restraining orders. We're going to take a look at those orders and that system tonight through the eyes of the people most directly affected. And we'll also look at the conditions behind them. To begin with, let's take a better look at the tragic death of Sherry Jones.
The shooting occurred just outside Gresham's Opticraft lab. Police say Sherry Jones worked at the Eyeglass Center and was leaving the parking lot on her lunch break when her husband, Joseph, rammed her car with his pickup. What followed was a gruesome sight for those driving along Northeast Halsey.
Well, I was coming down Halsey, and I witnessed the gentleman get out of his truck and point the 12 gauge at the lady in the car and fire it. And when I turned around, he was falling back overward like he shot himself.
According to court documents, Joseph Jones was a Vietnam veteran who had served 3 tours of duty. His wife had said he received counseling for post-traumatic stress syndrome. Co-workers say the couple had been separated and in a dispute over their 5-year-old child. Fearing for her safety, Sherry Jones went to court and received a restraining order against her husband last month. Police say Joseph violated the order, was released from jail yesterday, and this morning he brought his own violent end to the dispute. In Gresham, Al Segala, Channel 2 News.
Let's put some flesh in the studio tonight behind the story, bring it up to date. Would you introduce yourself, please?
Peggy Tennyson.
And Peggy, you knew Sherry, didn't you?
I was Sherry's roommate. She had asked me to stay with her to help take care of her, too, because she was so scared to stay at home.
And I can see that this is still recent enough to be very painful for you.
Yes, it is.
Peggy, in your view, why? Why Sherry? Why did this happen?
Because the system messed up. That here was a man that could, like any man, tell anybody anything and they're going to believe him, and 5 seconds later he's going to go do whatever he wants anyway. He will apologize, he'll do anything. And then the system believes what he says at the time. He lets him out of jail. I blame the judges, and I blame the cops, and then I blame Joel himself because there was no place for him to go. It was terrible. I don't know really what to say. I think there needs to be a lot of stuff done, though, so that nothing like this will ever happen again.
Thank you. We'll take that up. We'll pursue that. I'm going to pursue it next with you.
Sue Cowan. I am a victim or a survivor of domestic abuse. I got a restraining order as soon as I left my ex-husband.
Now, tell me, Sue, when was this? You got this
December of '87. I went
'87.
I went to the court in January of '88. I stayed at Bradley Engel House for 3 weeks.
And then you got the restraining order.
Right.
Then what happened after you got the restraining order?
They weren't able to serve the restraining order to him because he wouldn't answer the door. So there was this floating around restraining order that was doing no good. About a month after that happened, basically the same thing that happened to Sherry happened, only I got a lot luckier. He chased me in my car after work, rammed my car. I fortunately got back to work after unhinging my car. Then there was a warrant out for his arrest. They never arrested him because he wouldn't answer the door. So he showed up at my mom's house a while after that, about a month, I guess, after that, and we all called the police. We all panicked, and they arrested him then on reckless endangerment and then served him the restraining order. So it took months for the restraining order just to be served so I could have some kind of protection. And in the meantime, he did as he pleased and continued to after the restraining order, but that's a long story. But
Tell me again, what did he do after the order again?
He would show up at work. He would show up at my apartment. He got my enlisted phone number and would call me. He found out where I lived and would show up there. Showed up at my sister, showed up at my parents, crying to them and as if they were going to help him. Sent harassing things to work, put things in my car, had people or himself call everybody that I worked with to try to make me lose my job, making up stories that I was crazy and on drugs. And
what's this do to you, to be under this?
It makes you really angry because you feel like you've lived with this all these years and you feel like you finally get away and you're going to have some peace, and you don't.
And afraid.
And you're really afraid and you're really angry. And so...
Let me ask you this. Are you afraid anymore?
No. Connie, sitting next to me, is the first wife of my husband, and he's now deceased. He killed himself in February.
And my question for you, Sue, is would anything take anything less than that to stop your fear?
No.
Is this just isolated? Or let's take a look at our viewers here. Excuse me, the audience here. Let me ask you, in this room, how many people here have had a restraining order in their favor put out? Let's have a show of hands, if I could, please. The people who've had restraining orders, no, have been protected by them, have asked for and got restraining orders. Okay, now how many of you have had problems, had abuse after the order? After the order. Right after the order. Right there, was you done, or you don't have to do it. Could you tell what happened to you?
Yes, I can relate a lot to her story about the abuse, and really the way I see it is the only way to stop it is if he were to pass away.
What happened in your case?
Since I've had my restraining order, he still comes up to my mother's. He still harasses me, threatens me over the phone, and I try to go very much through the court system, but I relate also what she said, that the men seem to really, they believe him, what they say. You know, I'm sorry. I have heard I'm sorry so much. It means nothing to me anymore. And my life is just a mess because of this man.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Connie Miller.
Mm-hmm.
Again, Sue and I...
You were the first husband of Wayne that Sue told us about. Mm-hmm. Your first wife, excuse me.
I was with Wayne for 15 years, married to him for 11. When I left, I didn't get a restraining order for 5 years because he told me he would kill me if I got a restraining order. And he did the same thing. He threatened. He sent threatening letters. He sent me letters from an aunt that had passed away 5 years before. He did sick things. He threatened to kill my family. He threatened to kill anyone that I ever, if I ever went out in public. I didn't even go anywhere for 8 months because, if he ever saw me with anyone, male or female, he'd kill him. If he ever saw me anywhere, he'd kill me. And for me, it wasn't the physical. It was the phone calls and stuff. Although I was out of town one weekend and I came home and he'd broken into my house and took a knife and cut up all my furniture and sliced up the couch and things like that, and then left the knife on the kitchen table saying that I would be next. I still didn't get a restraining order. I still didn't call the police because he always said that he'd kill me if I did. And when I finally got the restraining order, was his probation officer from being on probation from breaking Sue's restraining orders. See, part of my fear was added because I knew what he was doing to Sue after she left. And because I kept track of that.
And you saw in her case that the restraining order wasn't doing much good.
Right, and part of me felt like, I've heard enough times over the years that they don't work. And he told me, if you get a restraining order, I'll kill you. You'll be dead. I'll spend the rest of my life in jail, but I don't care. You'd be gone. So it was like he didn't care. I would be dead. He'd spend the rest of his life in jail, and he wasn't worried about that. He wasn't concerned about that.
What about after you got the order? Did anything change?
No, after I got the order, he continued to, well, he called 2 hours after being served. I was lucky that Sue went through the system to have the order served and had the officers. I have a friend that serves restraining orders, and so he didn't, it wasn't a policeman standing at the door, so he opened it, you know, so I was able to get around it that way. But he continued to make phone calls. He continued to send letters. The last time he called was in December, and my divorce was final in 1985. I left him in 84, and so clear up till December he was still calling. He was.
That's 5+ years. 5+ years of being really stalked. In your case.
And it's a feeling you never, ever feel safe. You know, and I knew the things he was doing to Sue, and it was like when he was busy doing stuff to Sue, I had a month or two where he wouldn't call. And then maybe Sue would have him in court or something, so then he'd turn around and you know, Sue and I hadn't talked until this January. But I kept track of what he was doing, and it was like when he wasn't bothering her, he was bothering me.
Thank you, Connie. Anyone else here wants to tell what it's like to have no place to hide in this situation? Right there.
One thing I found with the restraining orders on an ex-husband, and it would always be his word against mine. One afternoon, I came home, I had restraining orders on him, and lo and behold, he'd been sitting in my closet for an hour and a half in my house. But it's like I didn't have proof, no neighbor saw it, and I remember calling and saying, is there anything I can do? And the person on the phone said, well, it's a domestic problem. And so it's like my word against his. I didn't have any proof that he had been sitting in my closet for an hour and a half. And that got very frustrating. It's kind of like I had to prove myself to make sure what I was saying was really true, to have something done to him. And
you gasped at that. Why?
I had proof. I had a restraining order. He was in my house. He spit coffee all over my furniture. He slashed all the hoses in my house, my wash machine hose, my hoses underneath all of my sinks. I had proof. I gave them hoses. I had, you know, the only thing is I took 2 days to call the police because I was so afraid of everything that he had done in my house. He had told me if I called the police, he was going to chop my hands off with an axe. And if I heard a scratch at my window at night, it wasn't going to be a tree, it was going to be him. And I was going to look worse than any movie I'd ever seen. So I was afraid to call the police. But I did. It took me 2 days. I called the police. They came out, him-hawed, took the hoses, didn't do anything. I got so mad, I called a victim witness. I called the prosecutor's office. I wrote a letter to the judge. My ex-husband stood in front of the judge and said that he had paid all of his restitution. The judge said, restitution satisfied, didn't even ask me. It had never been paid. But yet I had all this proof. So the prosecutor, because I had called and kept calling, the prosecutor took my statement, gave it back to the police department, said, you investigate this. Then they have done an investigation and still nothing's came of it, you know. And that was a restraining order violation. He had fractured my jaw just 6 months before that.
Is this frustration I hear with the system that you started off at the beginning, Peggy Tennyson? Is this common?
Yeah.
Frustration with the system?
Police that don't believe you, police that treat you like, why don't you just get out then if it's so bad? You know, they demean you. They act like it's not, like you're taking up their time.
Well, with that, let's turn to the system. Would you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, my name is Elizabeth Welch. I'm a judge in Multnomah County.
Judge Welch, you're a judge. I'm going to ask you for an opinion. How well does the system of restraining orders and enforcement work?
It works very well for some people and not at all for others. Listening to the stories I've heard today, restraining orders are used for a very wide variety of family and relationship problems. Some of them are very severe and some of them are not. I think the people they work the best for are law-abiding people. In other words, where there's a problem in the family, but the individual who is restrained respects the law, does not want to be arrested, is afraid of being arrested or of having to go to court. So those people you're not going to see today, probably, and probably a great percentage of the restraining orders are helpful. For those people for whom it's not going to work, the problems are just monstrous to describe. They're everything from the fact that the behavior that is a violation of a restraining order, some of these ladies are talking about, is not very significant from a criminal standpoint. In other words, the act that was done, like cutting a hose, is, you know, that's not something that the police are going to respond to very well.
Unless you think maybe that's a sign that it's your throat that's going to be next.
Right. But from the standpoint of the way the system responds, it's a question of the gravity of the particular conduct. Most of the fear comes from the people's relationship and what they know about each other, what they know about what that person is capable of. That's very difficult to communicate to a system that really doesn't understand family abuse at all.
Another part of the system that, as we've just heard, doesn't understand much is the police. Would you identify yourself, please?
Terry Wagner, Detective, Portland Police Bureau.
Terry, what do you say to this frustration with the police, that the police don't help?
I get frustrated with the system, too, all the time. Police officers respond to these commonly. That's a high percentage of the calls that they take, the domestic violence. In the attempts to intervene, it's difficult sometimes to get women who feel that they can follow through to see that he gets convicted and goes to jail or something happens to him. It's hard for women to stand up for themselves. It's difficult.
Are there frustrations from the police viewpoint in this matter?
It's pretty tough when you spend a lot of time investigating a case only to find out Monday morning she's called the DA and she doesn't want to come to court.
The DA?
The district attorney's office.
Is the district attorney's office represented here?
Yes.
Would you identify yourself, please?
Rod Underhill, I'm a deputy district attorney, Multnomah County.
We'll make you the third leg of the system here. Your view. How does it work? How well is it working? You prosecute these people, correct?
That is correct.
The violators.
Yes, I do.
Catching many in your net, you think?
We catch many. We don't catch them all, and we don't even actually catch most of them, I would say. The first step is the person comes in, the person that has been violated comes in, and that's part of our frustration also, is that many of these women are truly afraid. And as we've heard it echoed, they will let violation after violation go by before we'll see them. And so that's frustrating for the officers. It's frustrating for the district attorney's office because, as Ms. Wagner, Detective Wagner, has just stated, I'm the one that gets that call Monday, and from a person who has been sometimes very traumatized over the weekend, and will say, I'm not going to come in and sign a complaint. I don't want to prosecute. And they have their own reasons, and rather than get into all of those, there are as many as you can count. There are a number of them.
These orders, Judge Welch, too hard to get, too easy to get?
They're very easy to get once you get inside the building, if you can express yourself clearly enough. The law is that if you have been threatened, injured, or placed in fear of serious bodily injury, or been the victim of forcible sexual relations against your will, that you can get a restraining order. If that has happened within the past 6 months, they're not hard to get.
How many, since you give out a lot of these, how many do you think in the state of Oregon of these orders are issued every year, in a year?
I really don't know in the state of Oregon. I would say in Multnomah County, probably about 3,000. But there's a lady up over on the other side that might know better than I.
Well, that's close enough, because generally we run about half the state when it comes to just about anything. So that would be about 6,000 a year in the state of Oregon. And many of them, as you said before, many of them failing. Audience here, why do they fail? Why is the system failing here? In the back, right there.
They fail because you can hold up that piece of paper in front of him, and he's just going to laugh at you, tear it up. He's going to hit you right through that paper. You can wallpaper your house in it, in your front door in it. And
why does he laugh at it, in your view?
Because he simply he told me, that paper won't stop me. And then I had proof. He had stole my son, stole all of my furniture, and knocked me unconscious. My eye was so swollen shut, and I had a black eye for a solid year where he cracked the bones around my eye. And like her, because it took me 3 days to get coherent enough to go to the sheriff's office, they said, well, obviously it wasn't that bad, or you'd come in the night it happened. And so he knows the policemen aren't going to do anything. I took a warrant for his arrest from Skamania County. The deputy prosecuting attorney typed it up and handed it to me and said, take this to the prosecuting attorney in Pacific County. He called him and said, this little girl's coming in and she wants her baby. The guy is a punk. He has beat her up repeatedly. He steals everything she ever has and destroys it. Let her have her child. When I got there, he stole him on Thursday. Monday, he went to the courthouse and he got custody. He got custody of my son. I had already had custody for 3 years. He got custody in that county, and they would not honor the arrest warrant. I did get my son, but it took me 9 days. I lost my job. My parents lost $3,500 in pay because they took time off work to run me back and forth. And even though I had prosecuting attorneys in one county on my side, and the policemen and everybody else, the prosecuting attorneys in Pacific County didn't care because he had lied to them. And they said, well, those papers are 3 years old. They're no good. Custody papers don't just disintegrate after 3 years. They're still good. Mine didn't work.
He was faster than the prosecutors on that. In the back, you may.
One thing I'm hearing over here, I'm very curious why there's not a male police officer here, why there's a female police officer. I don't currently work in a women's shelter, but I did for a year and a half, and my experience was that we would get a different point of view if we had male officers here. The other thing I hear from the legal...
Let me ask you to define that. What do you think would be what would be the different viewpoint of a male police officer in your judgment? And then I'll put that to our police officer.
In my judgment, there would be several views, one of which would be the good old boy. Well, you know, I can kind of understand how she could piss you off and you might want to knock her around, but I got to, you know, I've got to do what's legal here. And I have not heard this. I've had women clients tell me this, that they've heard when they've called the police and they've come on restraining order. The other thing is, a lot of times I think it's disbelief that how can somebody of my own gender mutilate a woman or children or do all these horrible things that we hear about. The thing that disturbs me the most is what I'm hearing over here is the same thing we always hear, that somehow it's the women's fault. Somehow women, it's our responsibility to change this. That's what I'm hearing.
Let's take it to you. I'm back to you, Terry Wagner. You're representing the Portland Police Department. What she says is that we might get a different viewpoint from the men on your force, that they would be less sympathetic, that they would be inclined to think, well, it's her fault. She isn't taking care of herself. She's leading them on, etc., things like that. How do you respond to that?
Well, first of all, the sergeant that was asked to be here is in Seattle with his wife for the weekend on their anniversary, so they did ask a man to come, and I'm the stand-in. Police officers, like any other profession in the world, are going to be bringing to their job certain biases and prejudices. But the law is clear in certain situations what the action of the police officer is supposed to be. In domestic violence, if there's been a physical assault and there's injury, or there's the threat of serious injury, and the person is present, he's to be taken into custody, he or she.
Do you think a lot of this is a question, though, of dealing? And a lot of accusations we hear here are about the reception I got, the way he looked at me. Do you think that our Portland police are sensitive to this situation, how to handle it?
I think the vast majority of them are, yes.
Do you have any kind of training as to how they should handle this situation?
Yes. They're trained specifically in the law, what they're required to do, and they also receive training within the academies as to how to deal with women and men in family situations that we're talking about. These are very serious situations for the police officers to go to. They oftentimes will go to the domestic violence dispute, and before they know it, the wife or significant other is turned on them and is saying, I don't want him arrested, et cetera, et cetera.
Right there.
Judith Armada with the Oregon Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. I think what we've passed some laws in Oregon, and they were model laws in the country. And they do a little bit, but they're not going to solve the problem of domestic violence. And what people tend to do sometimes when they pass laws is they say, great, we passed the law, we solved the problem, we can go home. That's not true. And what we're hearing is that we still have immense education to do, both within the system and without it, you know, and we're caught in that kind of a bind. So, yes, we pass laws and we try to explain to people what those laws mean, the police officers, how to enforce them, all of that sort of thing. But we're still looking through the blinders we've had on for centuries, where it used to be, not that long ago, completely legal for a man to beat his wife. Completely legal. Those things don't change overnight. So what we have now is a system that's been pushed to try to intervene, attitudes that haven't quite always met up with that. Some do, some don't. And, you know, the problem is tremendous, and people still want to be blinded to that problem, to not really understand how significant it is. I think the system needs to intervene in a big way. We don't yet take domestic violence seriously. We need to start taking it seriously as a major crime that it is. And even when we first see it, when it's just a domestic spat or pushed around or that sort of thing, what we know is that it escalates. And it goes from being pushed around to being potentially knifed or, you know, something like that. It escalates. And it's a widespread problem. It isn't just like a few psychotic individuals. It's widespread, and it has something to do with our culture and how we're educating males and females.
Some will tell you, and you hear the word often, that these women are captives in a captive situation. Why are they captives? Why don't they leave? We'll talk about that when we come back right after this. Locked in. That's often the situation. Let's see if we can find out why. Back to you, Connie. Connie, would you, if you could, share with our viewers the story of the 2x4s and the wall?
That was back when I was married, probably less than a year. And I had been asleep, and my ex-husband had been out for the evening, and he came home, and I woke up to being beat up. I don't know what I did in my sleep, but obviously I did something. And I had a Irish setter, and she started attacking him because he was hurting me. And he grabbed the dog, and he threw her and locked her in a closet. And then he grabbed me, and he slapped me, and he hit me a couple times, and then he just took me and threw me against the wall. And it just happened by chance that I hit between the 2x4s, and I went through the wall. Probably if I'd have been a little ways over, it probably would have hurt me a lot worse. But even when that happened, just because the mode I was in, and you know, all of these things that I thought were little, I laughed about it. You know, it was like, as soon as it happened, as soon as I went through the wall, it was like just this click, and then he's fine, and he's not mad anymore, and he started laughing, so I started laughing, and for 6 or 7 years after that, it was a big joke. Remember when I threw you through the wall? And
it's not a funny joke at all, is it?
It's not, but it's a defense that, you know, if you have to be honest with yourself and face the things that happen to you every single day, you would be like, you would go crazy. And so you laugh about it, or you, as Sue and I talked about, you talk about it as if it happened to someone else. Until 2 years ago, when I started going to counseling, I could sit here and tell you about when he pulled me off a ladder and kicked me, broke my tailbone.
I'm going to review some of it, because you were kind enough to give us a portrait of Wayne. And this is an entire page of an unbelievable list of demands and insults to you. I'm just going to share some of these with our viewers. I was not allowed to have friends. I could not have family over to visit. I was not allowed to take showers, and could only bathe in the same water he had just taken his bath in. He usually left me with a list of at least 100 things to do each day. I had to do everything listed, or I'd get beat up. He also liked to play games that were abusive. One of his games was to take a pillow and hold it over my face, smothering me until I was kicking and screaming and gasping for breath. That was a game to him. And Connie, the question I have for you, in this incredibly horrible existence, why didn't you leave? Why didn't you just walk out and say goodbye, Wayne?
Whenever I would try, and I mean, we would have a disagreement or something, and I learned real early not to disagree, but it's like I would try to leave. I would even just want to leave just for a little bit, and he always told me, if you try to take one step out that door, you won't live to take a second one.
So was it fear?
It was fear.
Real fear.
I believe, there's no doubt in my mind that he would kill me. There was no doubt in my mind.
Put that same question to others. Why don't you leave?
My name is Bryn Hunting, and my best friend was murdered in January of 1990, and he gunned her down at he started shooting at us at his apartment, and then he also shot me in the head and left me for dead, and later killed himself. So we were fortunate in that respect. But it was at a point where she was deciding that this was not somebody she needed to be involved with. And she was telling him that this was not going to work, that she wanted out. He came to her and said, or he came to me first and told me, showed me his gun, said he was going to kill himself. And then later on, during some ensuing arguments, he shot us in his driveway, and then he chased us down to a gas station, went to my car and shot her 13 more times, and then came after me, stood a foot away from me, put the gun to my head and shot me. And fortunately, it hit my skull and exited. But I've been shot a total of 4 times, and I didn't even like this guy. And she was afraid of what he might do to her if she were to leave. So
Fear. So there's fear. Are there any other reasons why women in these situations don't leave? Other reasons, right there.
One of them that was talked about before was isolation. A lot of these men will isolate the women from their friends, from their family, from their workplace. They won't let them go to work, or maybe the women can't go to work because they're too battered. They will take the car keys, or they will dismantle the car. They won't let the woman leave. They will call every moment of the day. If they leave for work, they'll call it. And if the woman's not there to answer the phone, she gets beat up when he comes home.
Fear, isolation, other reasons why they don't leave, right there.
Susan Tisdale with the Downtown YWCA. I've also encountered a whole lot of problems around the fact that these women have children, whether it's with these guys or not with these guys. They constantly threaten either to torture the children, to take the children, and there's no real consequences. These guys do these things and do these behaviors on a continual basis, and you either have to catch them or, like the judge mentioned, the people that these restraining orders work for are people that follow the law and have some sense of moral conscience. These people are out of control, and a piece of paper is not going to stop their violence.
In the back, other reasons. Why do they stay?
I think the system totally encourages them to do so. The women know that everybody in the system practically is thinking this is okay, and it's the man who's really doing, he's believable and she's not. I think it's an extension of this whole system's abuse of women. Underpaid, no decent child care, told you can't even decide about your own abortion. I think it's capitalism, frankly. I think it needs a new kind of system. It needs socialist feminism.
Right there.
I also think it's probably a lot because they try to brainwash you into believing that nobody will ever love you like they have.
Yeah.
Nobody will ever take care of your children like they take care of your children. You're not attractive anymore. You have things wrong with you. You're not desirable to other men like you are to me. No one will ever take care or love you like I do.
Totally.
Is there also, in this, is there also a real flattery and over-attention? Is that the kind of thing? Is there a real wooing that takes place? Right there.
The personality, I think, of an abusive individual is the overkill of kindness in direct relationship to the violence.
Yeah,
they're just as kind and loving as they are violent and mean. As a product of the isolation, I think that I know that I didn't have a whole lot of, I internalized it a lot. When you're isolated with someone who's telling you that you're not worthwhile and pounding you in the face while he's telling you, and you don't feel that there's anywhere to go, after a while it does have an effect on you. And the crisis lines as a resource to call, it was a wonderful thing to have that clear information coming back. Yes, this isn't, no, this isn't okay. No, this isn't your fault. But what propels all this is, in fact, this very question, why do the women stay? That in itself is placing the blame on the wrong individual here. The question is, why is a man doing this? Why is this power and control so uneven in our society?
Yeah. Let me ask the professionals here, is there a pattern here? Right there, would you identify yourself, please?
Yes, I'm Kathy Kyle with the Mid-Valley Women's Crisis Center in Salem.
Do you see patterns here?
We see a pattern of the batterers, and this has been learned from many, many years of study, and it has been corroborated by the batterers themselves in many instances. They definitely follow a specific cycle of violence. The abuse occurs, and then they exhibit a period of guilt. In understanding that guilt, we need to understand that it is self-directed guilt. In other words, they may say something like, oh, I'm sorry I did that to you, it'll never happen again, but I might get caught. We don't hear that I might get caught that comes with the guilt. And then the rationalization, but you made me mad, you pushed my buttons, you're messing around on me, you're spending all my money, you're a rotten housekeeper, you're a lousy wife. Always putting the responsibility on the victim. And then we see a period.
Well, in the case of your Connie's case,
Right.
it would be very easy for you to be a rotten wife if you couldn't do 100 things right a day and all things right here. Is that a situation that make it impossible to be a good
Absolutely. That, as I go around the cycle, you'll see where that part fits in. Then the period of normal behavior doesn't necessarily mean the relationship is normal. It means that it needs to be seen as normal by everyone around, employers, friends, neighbors. So we don't talk.
Let's hide it.
We keep our mouths shut.
And then?
We make excuses for the bruises.
And
Then they fantasize about the abuse. They get an adrenaline rush, and it's something they like. So they go through a period of fantasy about abusing their partner. And then they plan, how can they do this again? What do they need to have happen in order to make the abuse? If it's a jealousy kind of thing, they'll set up. That's the next step, is the setup.
Preparation, planning.
Fantasy, planning, and setup. In the case of Connie's situation, he gave her a list of 100 things to do. And then when she didn't get it done, which he knew she wouldn't be able to, that's ridiculous, he had his reason, his own reason, that he created in his fantasy in order to beat her up again. And the abuse, the cycle continues on and on. Some men will
the cycle has been broken here. How many people here, how many here have left? How many did get out? Let's flip the question, take the flip side of the question and ask it a while ago. I'm going to ask you, why did you leave? How were you finally able to leave?
It got to the point where my children's concern was more than mine. Even though I needed to get out of the situation too, I was more concerned for their safety than I was for mine. So that's when I left.
Others, why did you leave? In the back, why did you leave?
I left when there was no shelters and no crisis lines. And I left because I was laying on the floor getting choked and watching my son scream in terror, and he was 3 years old. And my experience has been that these women, like we're talking about, this is compared to being a prisoner of war. And men should be able to relate to that, who have been in the service. This is a process of being beaten down, mentally, physically, sexually, every other way, to the point that you're a subhuman in your eyes. But the strength of women with their children, a lot of times we will put up with things till we die.
Well, I'll tell you, I thought I had a pretty rough first sergeant, but there's nothing what I heard here. You're not even in that league, if you're talking about.
But, you know, the whole concept of the mental, whether or not someone kills you, like we were talking about the legal aspect, whether or not someone kills you is not the point. That your whole life is terrorized, that you can't function in the world because of this fear that someone has power over you, and no one is doing anything about it.
But they do get you. Why did you leave?
Well, I was lucky enough that he was arrested for 3 outstanding warrants pertaining to things before I had met him. And it was a wish of my mother and mine that he would get arrested, and it was on Christmas night that he did. And immediately, as soon as I knew he was in jail, he couldn't get to me, he couldn't destroy my car, my home, or threaten to take my baby from me. I went to the Women's Crisis Center in Astoria, and they were super. And they did get me my protection order, and the judge there was wonderful because he put in the protection order absolutely no visitation. So he wasn't allowed to come near me for any reason. And that's important there.
Common thing I've heard here is you're leaving for the children. Fear for the children. Is that common? Right back to you.
I think in my mind, I was able mentally, I guess, I don't know, to handle what was going on or to ignore what was going on to myself. But when it started to affect my children, it made a tremendous difference. And it sounds stupid, but you see someone that you love tremendously getting hurt, and you can't let that happen. And I don't know why I could let it happen to myself, but at that point, it was over. You know, I just had, that was it. That was my answer to leave.
We're going to be looking for some other answers here, answers of what to do about this problem. When we come back, right after this. murder, brutality, and terror that the law can't always deal with. What to do about it? First, let me put it to the victims. Victims, what would you do about it? If you could change the system, how would you change it? Right there, how would you change it?
I think I'd start by taking men like that and putting them away for a very, very long, long time.
Longer time. Way in the back, what would you do?
The first thing we need to do is we need to educate the society. I can't change
Teach them
it.
what?
She can't. Teach them that it is not the woman's fault. No woman ever got up first thing in the morning and said, well, gee, I don't have a black eye today, so let's make him mad so he's going to blacken my eye. No. Women don't do that. Women don't sit around all day and think, well, he's going to come home tonight and maybe we're going to fight. They sit there in panic. You people who've never been through it need to sit there and think of the most scared time in your life ever. And then think about living with that every single day of your life. Every minute.
What to do about it? Sue, back to you.
First of all, it should be easier to serve a restraining order. It shouldn't have to be by a sheriff or somebody you know. Why can't they just mail the thing? I mean, it seems to me that they put the rights of the abuser before the victim. And another thing, I think that the police need to be more aware of the fact that just because you're married to someone doesn't mean that somehow you gave up your rights and you're no longer a citizen of the United States. I couldn't help the fact that this man was my husband and he decided to abuse me. I still needed protection. I still needed help, and it wasn't there. And that's a lot of it, I think.
Throw it open. What to do about it? What to do about it? Right there.
Well, I'm Greg Milnes from Circuit Court in Hillsborough.
Judge Milnes, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And I'd say that fully 2/3 of the restraining orders I grant are the people come in and ask that they be terminated, dismissed within certainly 30 days, a lot of them the same day or the next day. And my staff, myself, we spend a lot of time and emotional energy saying, don't do this. And sometimes we don't grant the dismissal, but many of them are, they ask to have them dismissed. And that bothers me.
What would you do? You're a judge, what would you do?
Sometimes,
how could you improve the system?
Well, I think I would keep them for a greater length of time, not allow them to be dismissed within at least 30 days. I try to do that kind of thing personally, but sometimes it's difficult when she's there pleading with you. It's okay, it was my fault, I shouldn't have had this restraining order in the first place.
That's the fear.
Right there.
I think there should be some sort of mandatory counseling. I know this is expensive, but anytime there's abuse where someone's life is in jeopardy, the judges and the authorities have to take it a little more seriously than an argument over what to watch on TV tonight. And it's not a threat to the men. This doesn't work. I think something new has to happen where they are afraid. Show me an afraid abuser.
Right there, back to you.
If my husband would have been prosecuted in the first place, I wouldn't have needed a restraining order. So, you know, if they would prosecute them to begin with and quit lowering, you know, he was charged with an assault too, with a weapon, with a knife, and they lowered it clear down to domestic violence. And so he's out and he has to call a probation officer every month. If they would have put him in jail to begin with, I would have needed a restraining order.
Let's draw a full circle here. Does someone think maybe that they go too far sometimes in these situations? You, sir?
My name is Howard Binns. I'm a father's rights activist here in Portland, Oregon, and I feel like Custer here a little bit. But I agree with some of the points that were made. We got a real problem with apples and oranges here. Basically, you have quite a severe group of victims that really need a lot more help than what the family law department can provide. I think there's not enough work as far as prevention up front, getting some programs where a man can go call a crisis line, get some education as to how to handle conflict. I think we need to segregate family disputes and custody battles and abuse of the system as far as getting a man segregated from his family to gain an advantage in a custody battle versus the abuse we've heard here today. Those are two different things. I think the point that was made about reconciling where abuse goes on, and yet when the system does step in and try to take charge, for some reason the couples get together again. That's happened to me just 3 times this last week. So sometimes you know, I think we've really got to take a look at evaluating the problem up front and trying to segregate the abuse from other matters that are much less significant than what we're talking about here today.
Right there, you, sir.
Yeah, I'm Bernard Hevey. I'm a lawyer in Stevenson, Washington. I represented Joel Jones, who ended up being a murderer and ended up killing himself.
He killed Sherry Jones. We talked about at the beginning of the program,
right.
Correct? Go ahead.
I think the issue of fairness was complicated, that issue. And what I see here tonight is what I see here tonight.
How do you say the fairness complicated that issue? What do you mean by that?
Well, he was stripped out of his home. No, he wasn't. He was stripped out of his home. He was given notice that get up and leave. He was a primary provider for that child, and he spent almost 27 days out of the next 35 days in jail, which did nothing but increase his rage. And he had...
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Wait,
no, wait a minute.
A second.
Wait a minute.
Finish. Would you be very finished? Okay, because I want to follow that point.
Yeah.
But I don't want to re-argue that case now.
No, I don't want to re-argue the case either. We're living in a sick society with a bunch of sick people. Wait a minute. With a bunch of sick people. And...
Hold it. He's got the floor.
Wait a
Hold
minute.
it.
No.
He's got the floor. Hold it.
Yeah. We're living in a sick society with a bunch of sick people, and you're looking for simple solutions. They don't exist.
All right.
Behind every one of these men was a mother. This is Mother's Day.
All right.
Remember that?
Okay, just a second.
Okay.
Time is running down. I want to put your point. Judge Welch. Hold it, please. Judge Welch, I want to put that point to you. Now, the point he made that has general application, because I say we don't want to re-argue that case, is that sometimes the process may trigger anger and make the situation worse. How do you respond to that point?
Well, I think, first of all, I don't agree with the implications of it. There are people, what I see is people who are very controlling. Everybody wants to control their environment. Some people have a real problem about needing to be in control. And people like that, whether they are mistreated by the system, just as most of the people in here have been mistreated in their eyes by the system or not, the issue is that their behavior is unacceptable and that they cannot form and maintain healthy relationships.
Do you think that the punishment, the threat of punishment, has a salutary effect in this instance?
Again, it does for the people it does, and it has no effect whatsoever on the people who are really ill people, who absolutely will not allow anybody to tell them how their family's going to be run, how their household's going to be run. I'm in charge, and anybody who crosses me is wrong, and I will go to any lengths to correct the misconduct.
And who are those people? We'll look for some of the warning signs when we come back right after this. Are beyond anything. Others can be reached by the system and by punishment. But who are these people we're talking about? What are the symptoms? Let's talk to the people out there who are in a relationship. What are the symptoms that we're headed for trouble? Would you identify yourself, please?
My name is Jeannie LaFrance, and I work for Bradley Engel House. And the symptoms are anything from the man is extremely jealous. He won't let her go places without him. He's jealous of her friends, not just other men. Family.
Jealousy,
definitely.
Control.
Jealousy, control, has to control everything she does, not just major things, but small things.
Doesn't want her to look nice.
Doesn't want her to look nice. And one other thing that I would really like to say is that we need to support the programs like Bradley Engel House that help the women empower themselves. And I know that's not the question you asked me right now. And
Okay,
we also have to support the legislature.
But let's, again, I want distant early warning signs right there.
My name is Becky Sanders. I'm a Seventh-day Adventist minister, and a perspective on this is women who are in really strict religious communities or grew up religious, it's a double dilemma. The church won't support them. Divorce is bad, so they stay in to avoid condemnation from their religious societies. And I think in terms of men staying, you know, they misuse scripture. You know, I'm the head of the house.
All right, but I do want to get again to Sue. Let's really be clear on that. What should people look out for?
Jealousy, possessiveness. I know what's good for you, no one else does. Anytime someone tries to take control from you or tries to take your power of yourself away from you, it's wrong. Get out. Then. Do it then. Don't even wait.
Right there.
I think that we've talked about extreme situations. This can happen on a lesser level of violence, and it's the same impact. I was married for 18 years and a very controlling thing. When I left, I felt I was retarded. I actually went to see if I was retarded. They can beat you down if they get mad at you.
The point over there, humiliation.
If they get mad at you for doing something simple as talking on the phone too long, or something that tests your insides.
Time is running here, and I'm going to go back to you soon. I'm going to ask you to close. I'm going to ask you to talk to the women out there who are concerned and advise them. Tell them what to do.
Get out. Go to a shelter. Call the police. Call someone. Break the silence.
Call someone. I'm going to interrupt you right there, Sue, and tell them who to call. We have some numbers there that are viewers right there. We have the Metro Crisis Line, 223-6161. You see those numbers? We'll post them again. They're ready for your calls right now. I'll close by saying when I first started as a divorce lawyer, I'm not one now, but I did about 75 divorces. I thought divorce and separation were terrible. There are worse alternatives than separation. If there's a message tonight, it's get help early. And we've given you some of those numbers that'll help you get that help. Thank you for tuning into Town Hall, and good night.